And that's what has happened with a lot of young men, with Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and others. They think they're reacting to bad stuff, and some of the stuff they're reacting to is bad stuff. But they're ending up getting co-opted into being a missions force of other bad stuff, different bad stuff. It is not a good thing to simply react against feminism by then sort of embracing a kind of secular patriarchal woman hatred. That is no win.
I'm your host, Harrison Lang, and on today's podcast, I am joined by Dr. Owen Strachan to discuss his most recent book, A Call to Cultivate, Overcome Anxiety by Thriving Where God Plants You. Dr. Strachan is a theologian, author, and a speaker who has written extensively on biblical manhood, theology, culture, and Christian living. His newest book offers a timely biblical response to the epidemic of anxiety by calling Christians back to faithful stewardship, meaningful work, and joyful contentment in God's providence. Dr. Strachan, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Harrison, and thank you for that kind introduction and very nice summary of my book. That was very succinct and well said.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, if you wouldn't mind also giving a further introduction to yourself, anybody who doesn't know you, and also to update on your life and ministry.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I'm the director of One Gospel, a new ministry headquartered at Redeemer Bible Church of Gilbert, Arizona. One Gospel is basically a worldview and discipleship resource anchored in the gospel. So we just want to stimulate good gospel-driven thinking and living. Gospel-centeredness was a huge thing 10 years ago, 15 years ago. There were strengths and weaknesses to the gospel-centered paradigm. I was shaped by it, and I see probably more strengths than weaknesses. And what has happened in the last few years is the evangelical world, the conservative side of it, has gotten a little tribalized and splintered. And we've actually kind of lost our gospel centeredness, our gospel mooring, in part because of some of the weaknesses of that project. And so what I want to try to do with One Gospel, if God would let me, and John Benzinger, my co-founder, is we just want to stake that gospel flag in the ground again. Our paradigm isn't so much to be gospel-centered, as if you've got to bring things back to this golden center all the time. Our paradigm is not in contest with that, but it's to be gospel-driven, where the gospel drives you out. You think about the momentum of God calling Abram, and you think about the Great Commission, and you think about how we go as Christians. So the gospel drives us out, not so much calls us in for a retreat. So that's some of what I'm doing now. I live in Louisville, Kentucky, work remotely for One Gospel. I have 3 kids, just about 3 teenagers, looking at college year after this one for the oldest, married to my wife Bethany for almost 20 years, member of Clifton Baptist Church here in Louisville, Kentucky, probably associated for many people with Tom Schreiner and Bruce Ware. Back in the Southern Baptist Convention, taught theology for almost 15 years, but not doing that at present. And just had this book come out.
Yeah, well, praise the Lord. I mean, I've been I think I mentioned this earlier before we started recording, is that you've been one of the key influences when it comes to, honestly, public theology in my Christian life. I remember when I was a new believer, about 18 years old, and I was heading off to you would know the school, Southwest Baptist University. And so I played baseball there for a bit, and I was a new Christian, and I was in the ministry department because I either wanted to be a pastor, lawyer, or baseball coach. And I was like, hey, all those, my undergrad can be biblical studies, so I'll just do that. And I was there at a time where it was very interesting to be a student at a Southwest Baptist University, where it was very culturally left-leaning, probably more moderate, probably more accurate, and then same thing with theologically. And you were very helpful to kind of walk through those issues. And then you were actually like one of my key influences early on in my Christian life. So I do want to thank you for that. One thing I do want to ask you on, you mentioned the gospel drivenness. Do you mind explaining a little more about the difference between, and why you worded it gospel driven rather than when you say gospel centered? Like, why is it important to be gospel driven?
Yeah. I like I said, I don't want to try to start an arms race. There's not going to be one, but between the two terms, I guess there was a little bit of emphasis, in particular with the public square stuff, with the gospel-centered movement as it wore on, such that issues that were political or seen as political or in the public square, however you want to frame that, the church was basically supposed to take, or ended up taking, as Keller led it or others, kind of a center position on lots and lots of things.
Mhm.
And Keller himself tried to do that. This isn't slander on my part about Tim Keller, who shaped me in a lot of
Mm.
helpful ways, as so many others with his focus on the gospel. But with politics in particular, I think that was a weakness as time wore on of the gospel centered project, because there are some things we land in what you could call a middle position on, I would argue, biblically as believers. But there's a lot of stuff that you don't land in the middle on. Keller was trying in Manhattan, admittedly, a very, very challenging place to be an evangelical and to be a public evangelical like he was, to not be stereotyped as red meat conservative. He was trying to show, and there's some good to this, that he was a thoughtful Christian. And so he did show that he was willing to critique both right and left. But there's, again, to repeat myself, there just are a lot of issues on which, yeah, there's a little nuance here and there, but we are against abortion. We are for the free market. We are for religious liberty. We are against the normalization of homosexuality in public life,
Mhm.
so on and so forth. And not on all of those issues, but on some of those issues, Keller really did in places take more of a centrist position. He did that on social justice, for example, like a lot of other Christians did. He kind of led the way in saying, yeah, we're not all out full blown critical theorists, but also we can critique systems and we can critique capitalism, so on and so forth. There is so much to say about all of those issues I just mentioned. I have been one over the last 10 years in a very small way as a Christian thinker in public who has said on, for example, critical theory, I'm not going to say that there's never anything true that a critical theorist says, but I am going to say as a paradigm that this is not something that syncs with Christianity. This is a system that is hostile to
Mm.
Christianity. And ultimately, we're going to have to, in a Colossians 2 and 2 Corinthians 10, 3 to 6 way, destroy this stronghold.
Mhm.
We can't sort of coexist with it. We've got to say, you cannot take over our pulpit because this is going to co-opt the gospel. So that's why, all that to say, I'm aiming for a gospel driven paradigm, which we can talk more about.
Yeah, no, and that's helpful. And as you mentioned, when it comes to those, we would say false ideologies that are actually destructive and antithetical to Christianity, is that yeah, like even a blind squirrel finds a nut. They're gonna get things right, but the problem is what's their foundational principles? Is that their foundational principles are antithetical to Christianity and the Christian worldview. And I think that's really helpful. And you've even articulated a lot in your most recent book, A Call to Cultivate. And I would even be curious, how much did that kind of influence you to write this book? Is there another reason that inspired you to write this book? And why do you believe that the message is so needed in our current cultural moment about for us to cultivate in a very anxious age?
We have had a lot of agency as Christians in America. And what has happened in the last 10 to 15 years is that a lot of Christians have felt, in the public sense and the private sense, like we have lost control. I see a lot of anxiety in the church at the private level, just at a day to day level. And I recognize that in my own heart and in the church, especially 5 to 6 years ago. I was just reading the book of Jeremiah in my devotions on my reading
Mm,
plan. And I came across Jeremiah 29, which of course has some famous verses that are quoted, verses 7 and 11. But I realized, oh, this is bigger than just sort of a printout verse to encourage you. This is a whole paradigm of how God's people were supposed to live and have their being in the world's most foremost pagan city, Babylon, in roughly the 580s BC. And so the exiles of Judah were not just given a couple, verses on a little printout. They were given really a worldview shift by
mm,
God. Like, you're not taking over Babylon. You're not supposed to leave Babylon, and you're certainly not supposed to accommodate Babylon. You're supposed to be in Babylon, but be a gospel presence. I can say from a new covenant perspective, a redeeming presence, maybe more
mm,
accurately, in Babylon. And that jumped up and bit me. And I realized, man, I feel a lot of anxiety and pressure and fear about my own life and everything changing. And this was lockdown era and COVID and big government and all these things just sort of going wild. And a ton of us felt a ton of anxiety and still do. And then at that public level, because of those negative developments in so many different categories, Satan just throwing ideology at the church. Um, I think what happened with a lot of believers is they reacted to a kind of feckless public Christianity that basically was amounted to be nice, be known for being nice, don't cause any waves, don't say anything really outspoken. And a lot of Christians, understandably, including some who have now gravitated to Christian nationalism, were frustrated by that. Again, let
Mm,
me repeat myself with the adverb, understandably frustrated.
mm,
But all that has led to this, Harrison. It has led to all of us kind of living in a state of anxiety, which social media, as I talk about in this
mm,
book, A Call to Cultivate, only helps you be. Social media is the best way for you to interrupt the peace and solitude of a given day
mm,
and get anxious in a hurry. I don't mean
mhm,
you could never use it, but it is just an anxiety factory. Okay, that all leads you to feel like when you're anxious, what's your foremost desire in that moment of anxiety? I got to claw back control. I've got to control my private life. And we as Christians, we got to get back control of the public square. It's slipping away. We got to get it back. I think God would have us actually shift our mindset
mm,
and say, a little bit like Bane in Dark Knight Rises, do you feel like you're in control? In other words, we're not in control. We were never in control. We enjoyed the illusion of control.
mm,
I'm not in control of any area of my life. I don't control my kids. I might think I do. A lot of Christian parents think they control their kids. They don't. I don't control my kids. I don't control my wife. I don't control my church. I don't control the public square. What I can do, and I'll shut up here, this is a long answer, is I can cultivate my
mm.
surroundings for God's glory.
Mm. No, that's good. And my next question to ask you is you use the word cultivate in the title, and it's a main theme throughout the book. What does it exactly mean to cultivate where God has planted us? And how does that idea stretch all the way back to Genesis and the entirety of the Christian canon?
Control is godless. Control is atheistic. Control at its root. We all slip into it. I certainly do. But control has you saying, me saying, I'm going to wrest back sovereignty of this environment, which is spiraling away from me. Cultivation says, I'm not in control. God is
Hmm.
in complete control. God is not only sovereign over this, God is incredibly good, kind, loving, patient, and forgiving. Furthermore, God gives us real opportunities to invest in his world and take dominion of it. Okay, so that's the cultivation paradigm. The cultivation paradigm is rooted in a good God. The control paradigm is rooted in atheism, fearful atheism, even in a practical, functional way, even if I just slip into that for 10-second bursts. We all do, again. Cultivation, then, if you think about it in a gardening sense, means you go out to the backyard and you pluck some leaves and you root up some weeds and you pour some water where it needs to go, and so on and so forth. Cultivation is action grounded in God's goodness that you genuinely take. You're not called to just sit on your couch as a Christian. You're called to go in the backyard like the Judahite exiles in 580s Babylon. They're called to go into that backyard, Jeremiah 29:5, plant gardens and eat their produce, eat its produce. They're called to tend that garden. Well, what was Adam called to do initially? Adam was initially a gardener, a forester gardener. Where are we headed in the grand plan of God, biblical theological plan of God? We're headed to the New Eden, a kind of mountain garden city. Who was Jesus identified as in John 20, mistakenly but powerfully in John 20:15? Mary thought he was, drum roll, the gardener. Okay, all of this helps us understand, I think, that we're not here to take control of this
Mm,
world. We are here, though, to cultivate this world, to bring it to a place of flourishing, to make
mm.
the garden healthier by the grace of God.
No, that's so good. I mean, that's honestly what our founding fathers kind of envisioned. And we had that conversation exactly. What is America a Christian nation? I have a nuanced take to that, and then we both probably both do. It's like yes, they had a
Sure.
Christian influence, but we're not. They weren't looking for a Christian theocracy. Um, but they understood that the role of humans, because they understood the created order, is that, and again, in some way, although some are deists, is that we are as God's image bearers displaying himself here on earth. And we do that by cultivating and creating in this world. And so both like when the farmer is planting seeds and it's, growing. And then, as you have a state now more uh, majority people like, stay at home mothers, mechanics, engineers, whatever anyone does is that they're doing it for the glory of God. I mean, I think you mentioned in your book about, uh, Martin Luther's doctrine of vocation. I think that's super helpful. The way to think about it is, and I get it when I went to seminary, and when I've, talked to people like, oh, you're just like you're like a different level Christian. Your work is spiritual. We can't actually get away that every work is actually spiritual. There's nothing that is truly secular. Again, there are things that are more secular jobs than the traditional sense, but everybody has a responsibility to steward what the Lord's entrusted with them, to to do that wisely and to do that in a God honoring way.
Yes, that's exactly right. And I would say an additional word because I really like what you just said. There's a lot of pressure, again, coming from a pretty anxious place, I think, if you actually scratch it all the way down, to Christianize everything today. It's not good unless it's done from an explicitly and directly Christian standpoint. That's kind of where the younger generation has gone, again, in response to a secularizing America and a weakened Christianity. A lot of young people are like, I'm tired of this small ball stuff. I want to
Mm,
go big. I want to build the post millennial kingdom of Jesus, and then he's going to return and just receive it and rule. I understand why there's a powerful draw for those reasons, but actually, there's anxiety that draws a lot of that, that drives a lot of that activity. What we are actually called to do is be salt and light. We are called that in a Matthew 5 sense, even in a political sense, Jesus is not scared off by the reign of Caesar. Jesus says to pay taxes to Caesar in so many words in Matthew 22:21. So Jesus has an understanding that there is going to be a lot of fallenness and a lot of unbelief in the world. So does
mm,
Peter. Peter comes face to face with it. And in Peter's epistles, and in First Peter in particular, Peter doesn't call the New Covenant, New Testament church to overthrow Caesar. He calls the church to pray for the emperor and honor the emperor. All of that, Harrison, helps us a lot as Christians today. It doesn't lead us to political defeatism. It doesn't lead us to sit on our hands and say, well, the world's just fallen, so let's just wait until Jesus comes. All we really need to do is go to church on Sunday and then basically just be Christian in a sort of low level, meaningful way Monday to Saturday. No, but also we don't have to be afraid, so to speak, hear this in the right way, of a fallen order.
mm,
Again, there's a lot of anxiety around us, I think, that doesn't go named, but there's almost this expectation among the younger generation today and leading voices in the Christian nationalist world that we're supposed to eradicate fallenness. Like if these Christians would stop being dorks and stop sitting on their hands, we would eradicate fallenness in our world. We are supposed to work hard against the darkness, push back the darkness by the power of God's grace. We can't eradicate darkness. We can't stop fallenness in all its we can't overcome sin. That's what Jesus does. So I would actually be a weird counterintuitive voice today for recognizing as a Christian, yes, push back against the darkness, be Wilberforcian, outlaw slavery if you can, so on and so forth, but also be comfortable being around non-Christians, be
mm.
able to learn from non-Christians, be able to coexist around non-Christians, be able to, in a secular job, work alongside them. I think we've got to stop seeing our present Babylon as an entity to be conquered tomorrow morning,
Mhm.
and we've got to see Babylon as our mission field again. We used to
Mm.
think of it that way. I think we've got to go back to that paradigm.
No, that's very helpful. And as you're even talking about responding to kind of the current cultural moment in Christianity, where you have these, kind of the people who there's a lot of ways I have a lot of agreements with is people in the Christian nationalism circle. And again, it's,
Sure.
it's just like honestly this little portion where it's like, yeah, I can't go there because I don't think that's one the government's role. I don't think it's biblical, and I don't think it's practical. But it made me think about, and again, most of the listeners probably wouldn't know what I'm talking about, but I'm sure you do. It is I think 10, 15 years ago when D.A. Carson wrote an article against on theological interpretation of Scripture. It is the yes but. Like there needs to be a yes but on Christian nationalism. Is like yes, you get this right, but this is why that we can't go all the way. It's like yes, when it comes to the D.A. Carson's article, yes, the
Yeah.
Bible is theological, but we can't ignore the historical redemptive context. And so I think that's
Yes.
very helpful for us to think through. Is that there's a lot of great things that Christian nationalists get right, but it's kind of the underlying principles that honestly go a little slightly too far. How do you think that we can respond, and how should Christians respond currently? If there's someone in your church that's wrestling through these issues, what does it look like for Christians to engage in the public square with not going into a Christian nationalism kind of you know, trad
Right.
conservative kind of way, but also still not going into the failures we would both say on the third wayism of kind of the Tim Keller movement. Again, I'm with you on the Tim Keller. I love Tim Keller when it comes
Sure.
to a lot of his preaching, but he did miss on the cultural and political engagement.
Yes. Um, that's a great question. Yeah, if there's somebody in my church who is grappling with these realities, as many are, what I first want to do is have a healthy conversation about them
Mm,
and articulate some of what we've already chatted about, namely that I understand frustration with small ball Christian public theology. I understand dismay at where America has gone. We've had a little bit of a turnaround in some ways with President Trump's administration and decisions and executive orders and that sort of thing. And we don't have to, Christians almost can't name that and can't say that out loud in certain circles. But um, you are not in any way required as a believer to think a given movement is all good or all bad. Part of what cancel culture and social media hysteria has done is it has decomplexified thinking in general and evangelical thinking in particular, where you have to find your tribe that you agree with perfectly and completely, and that tradition or tribe is basically perfect, and everyone else is just hopelessly blemished.
mm,
Part of what scripture itself does i- is introduce us to, for example, at the personal individual level, men and women who are very complex. You think about the heroes of Hebrews 11, who are those who are named or those who are obliquely referenced, and they are a mixed bag, just like you and I are. Why am I talking about that? Because just as people are complex, movements are complex, the public square is complex, politics is very complex.
mm,
So I would just say a quick word here to that frustrated young Christian trying to sort this stuff out. And I would say, I understand your frustration and I share it, like you were saying a minute ago, Harrison, to a serious degree. But what I would caution you against is a one size fits all. If you join this movement, you won't have any complexity and that movement won't have any weaknesses. I would say be careful about such thinking. And this is true not just in public theology, this is true with the Christian tradition. There's a very strong emphasis right now on confessionalism and retrievalism and a sort
mm,
of pristine Nicene tradition and all such matters. And that's another huge conversation we could talk about at greater length another time. But I would urge caution there too. I would just
mm,
say, I get it. I get what you're after. I know you're pushing against ahistoricism and, maybe Baptist churches where you didn't even know there was a church prior to this particular Baptist church. Good. I get it. I love your desire to read church history and creeds, confessions, doctrinal statements, and so on. But be careful there too. because every movement is complex. No tribe has the market cornered on truth. In all these respects, it's often going to be better to embrace a kind of um, convictional eclecticism where you have what you understand scripture to be teaching. So in public theology, you land roughly in kind of a Christian conservative position. You're clearly a biblical conservative as much as you can be in all these areas, but you're also going to be a little eclectic. You're going to
Mm,
realize that there's some non-Christians who say things well over here or over
mm,
there. There's economics, and not every economist has been a born again believer. You can learn from him. You,
mhm.
you come to a figure in justice conversations like a Thomas Sowell, who again is not at all a born again believer that I know, but has done a lot of good work in the area of social justice and market economies and that sort of thing. In all of this, Harrison, I'm putting a lot on the table here. My apologies, but you're able to be a convictional eclecticist, to mangle my own phrase, or let's make it a little bit more sayable, an eclectic conservative, by which I don't mean some weirdo who can't be nailed down on any issue. I mean you're genuinely convictional and conservative in biblical terms, but you recognize um, that God has common grace all through the
Mm.
world, and you're able to operate as if that is true.
Well, just about to mention, I mean, it goes back to common grace. Is like if you really, and it goes back to the Imago Dei. If you believe in the image of God, if you believe that every human being is made in the image of God and worth of dignity and respect, you also have to recognize that they have they might have valid reasons, even though they might not have a born again experience of being a Christian. You know that is that both can still be true. Now, again, like we were maybe talking about beforehand, I think it was, but people may believe in a created order. They may believe in a Christian worldview, but that doesn't mean that they're going to be Christian, you know? And so, like, those both can coexist. And I think those who, because I think we see, and I think we've talked about beforehand, but I'm part of the Kansas City Young Republicans in Kansas City. And so, vice president there, and like, probably over half the people there are non believers. Over
Yes.
half the people are not believers. What they've seen is they've seen all the hysteria and the culture. And again, these guys are 20 to like 30 years old. You know, they were raised when all the LGBTQ started going crazy and all that. And it's been really fun to actually have those gospel conversations with them. But the reason why, and I've told them this, is the reason why you believe this is because there is a God. There is a God who exists and has created this world in an orderly fashion. That's why there is order in this world, and we can't really have um, we can't even have reason. We can't have anything without a God. Like
Right.
there would be hysteria, even if that could even be defined in a godless world. Um, but where I see the problem going on, both in evangelicalism when it comes to conservatism, over the past few years, and it's mainly with young generation, but you think you see with among others, is these this sort of reactionary responses to the cultural moment. We're forsaking our principles for the sake of reacting against a bad thing, and that's that it's that we both agree. Hey, yes, the gender craziness, the
Yeah.
you can think about when it comes to socialism and all that stuff. Like, yes, those are horrible. We need to respond to that, but we don't
Right.
need to react to that. We need to respond with our principles. How do you think that we can get back to that? How would you encourage the next generation, even those who are, peers of yours? How can we encourage both evangelicals? Because that's my bread and butter. I love my evangelicals. But also just for conservatives overall, how can we ensure that we're not going to become reactionaries? You can think about Tucker Carlson when it comes to the Israel issue, where he's just saying crazy things about Israel and Islam, where he's saying Islam's actually like not a bad religion, and it's like again, like we can have the conversation about Israel and and all that relationship with America. When it comes to geopolitics and foreign relations for the United States, so those are good conversations. What we can't do is just react crazily and unprincipled. How would you just encourage, how could Christians think about these issues and not overreact?
That question is a podcast in itself, Harrison. It's a great question, or bound multiple questions bound up in it, really. And it's something. it's something that I spend a lot of time thinking about and sometimes trying to react to myself in hopefully a healthy way. I guess the first thing I would say is you don't want to be reactive. So that sounds rather basic, but honestly, if I'm training, for example, young men who, because of wokeness and feminism and lockdown policies and big government and socialism and other evil ideologies, are very reactionary, because young men are tempted to be reactionary anyway. I mean, what do you know, you've got a kid on the basketball court that you say you made the wrong pass. Does he react in a, thoughtful, eloquent manner, or does he go, no, I didn't, by nature? Men in particular have reactive blood coursing through their veins. That's part of what it is to have 3,000% more testosterone than young women, for example. Testosterone doesn't need to be eradicated, though. It needs to be disciplined, and it specifically needs to come under the discipline of the gospel. And that's why, in part, I'm so glad that someone like you is in the midst of those conversations among those who would identify as young Republicans, because that is a major mission field. Evangelicals have tended to think about their mission field as people to the left of them. So liberals and leftists, for example, and we need to go to the big cities, and we need to evangelize primarily people who are of a leftist strain. And there's lots to say about those instincts, good and bad. Actually, there's a massive missions opportunity right now among those who conglomerate on the right. And being on the right in no way means you, as you said earlier, are a Christian. It doesn't get you, in fact, 1 inch closer to heaven.
Mm.
To be a Republican or a conservative, to have a right view, biblically even, I would say, of the market, of the state, of justice, of religious liberty, so on and so forth. Being a conservative doesn't get you an inch closer to heaven. So we need to recognize that tons of people are reacting against bad ideologies. And I think, again, there's a real gospel opportunity there. So praise God for where you are and what you're doing, in my limited judgment. But as we get to know those people, which is what Christians are supposed to do, we're not just supposed to go out, scatter a bunch of gospel seeds over people, and turn our back and close the door. Ideally, I mean, we do whatever we can. We preach the gospel to whoever we can, even if we just meet somebody on the airplane and never see them again. We do whatever we can. But ideally, we actually can have long-standing conversations and relationships. And so with those young men, for example, we say, you don't just want to react to bad stuff. What you need to do, because if you are just a reactionary, you'll become a pawn.
Mm.
You'll think that you are a leader in the revolution, but what you actually are is a pawn of the revolutionaries.
Mm.
And that's what has happened with a lot of young men, with Tucker Carlson and Nick Fuentes and others. They think they're reacting to bad stuff, and some of the stuff they're reacting to is bad stuff. But they're ending up getting co-opted into being a missions force of other bad stuff, different bad stuff. It is not a good thing to simply react against feminism by then sort of embracing a kind of secular patriarchal woman hatred. That is no
Mm.
win. The Bible does not teach that. It is no win to react against wokeness on the left by embracing a kind of woke rightness, where now you also want the Constitution detonated. And now as you said, now you think Islam is good? What on earth? Or at least not that bad? It is no good thing to react against weak leftism and then end up embracing or at least softening Hitler. I mean, these are terrible reactionary moves that young men are being led by the nose into. So we need to do this. I'll shut up here. We need to go back to teaching how to think, modeling that by walking with people extendedly in relationship through that process. What that really means is we put an arm around a young man, or women put an arm around a young woman, so to speak, and disciple them, or if they're not a Christian, train them, help them think, listen to them, but teach them what is true.
Mm. Well, one thing that's true about reactionary personalities and being reactionary is that usually you're not cultivating. To bring back into the specific conversation of your book And one thing I thought was helpful is that you mentioned is that we should be cultivating, not consuming. Focus again, consuming is not a we can consume. It's not a negative thing. The problem is when we're consuming more than we're cultivating. How can young Christians think about this? How can young families think about cultivating rather than consuming, especially when it comes to their own family life? What would be some principles that you'd pass along to them?
So take away the fideistic delusion that if you would just join the text thread or follow this guy or go to this conference, and pay a lot of money in different respects to the key leaders over here, America would now be Christian. For example, stop falling prey to this delusion. It's a delusion, and it's a very profitable one. Instead, recognize that only Jesus is going to make all things right. Recognize that there are probably in America or the West going to be losses and going to be gains, and until Jesus returns. So you don't have to fall prey to defeatism. You also should not fall prey to triumphalism. Instead, focus on faithfulness, but not limit. I don't mean limited faithfulness, like don't hope for real good to come in your community or your city or your state or your country. But instead of being a reactionary and thus saying we've got to control things and take it all back tomorrow, play the long game. Play the long game. Cultivate a family, cultivate a marriage, cultivate your children, cultivate your community. In all of those cases, what I mean by cultivate is invest in. Invest in with the backdrop of sound biblical truth, namely a vision of God that sees him as ruling over all things well, as loving, as forgiving, as patient, as caring about us. And from that springboard, do the work you can do with the time you have. To the Babylonian exiles, God did not say, take back Babylon, take it over. God said, go back there, plant a garden, build a house, um, take wives for your sons, have them build families, and then be in Babylon and seek its shalom, seek its
Mm,
welfare. I think that is not a one-to-one mandate for us as if we're in the old covenant. We're not. But I think that is reflective of the new covenant mission of the church. And
mm,
by the way, you don't have to be married to do all of this. Just a quick word. I said build a family, cultivate your marriage, that sort of thing. The kingdom of God does not reduce to get married, have kids, and raise them to know Jesus. Family discipleship is a key part of kingdom advancement in the new covenant era, but family discipleship is not synonymous with Great Commission fulfillment. Single people have a vital role to play in a 1 Corinthians 7 way in the advancement of the kingdom. In fact, I would go so far as to say we need family building for sure, because most of us are called to that. We also need godly singles who are single minded for the kingdom. And single people in the whole let's take back America for Christ movement. I'll close off my comments here, can I think feel really bad and really guilty. They can feel like they're letting the team down because they're not having 9 children. They're not having 15 children. They're not slinging arrows out, so to speak. And I would just say that is false guilt.
mhm.
Don't embrace selfish singleness, please, of the modern American kind. As a Christian, hopefully you're not single, that is, simply to travel, eat good food, and have lots
Yep,
of fun.
yep.
As a single Christian, hopefully you're living a God-centered singleness. You don't know the future. You don't have to have given a vow to God whereby you've sworn off marriage or something like that. You don't know your future. You're not required. We put all these weird requirements on single people. I'm on a jag here. Please permit me to keep going if it's okay.
No, you're good, you're good. Keep
Sorry.
going. This is great.
Um, we ask single people to discern perfectly whether they have the gift of singleness or not. Some, I think, do know, like as best they can. I think this is my calling. I think this fits me. Praise God if that is so. Others do not know. Others are content being single for a while and then want to be married and then content and then it comes and it goes. And they're in a more confusing place. I I just would say, I would be a small voice who would say, let's not put requirements on singles that the Bible does not. Let's instead encourage single men and women, young or of whatever age, to cultivate a godly life, to be a God-centered single, not a self-driven single, and then to just see what God does with their life, knowing that they are free to serve the kingdom of Jesus in a focused way that a married person is not. And last statement, the New Testament does not tell us that married people advance the kingdom because they have kids and single people don't. Paul tells us he wishes, and this is kind of a personal aside on Paul's part, that more people were like him and were single for the glory of Jesus. So
Mhm.
you've got to live in that tension in some.
Mm. A few months ago, I was having a private conversation with a well-known theologian. This is private. I'm gonna not say his name because we all know who he is, but he is involved with TGC. Great conversation. Love the guy. You would love the guy as well. And we were talking, and we were having a conversation. I was like, and I asked him, what do you think is the future of evangelicalism? Like, what? Because this is right after when Ted's was getting bought out, and having that conversation. What does it look like for the future of evangelical higher education, but also just overall in evangelicalism? Like, what is our next big hurdle, or how can we get reunited? And where he said something, but the one thing I responded with that, and I critiqued the one thing I critiqued TGC about this. And again, I think TGC is great in a lot of ways. I think they have a lot of shortcomings when it comes to some things. But one thing I was mentioning that I've seen as a issue, and like you don't mention this in the book, but I think that it's connected here, is I think the biggest problem with the gospel center movement, when it comes to like relationships, is they have put singleness too highly on the totem pole. There's too
Mm.
many people I know who think like, well, like if I'm single right now, that means just God just calling me singleness. When the idea of Paul is actually a lifelong version of singleness, is like I know countless women. There's a reason why. If you go to any solid church, there's the amount of godly and gorgeous single women who are in their early 30s is astronomical. And again, there's a manhood problem there too, where I think that's partially why. But there's also a thing where there's this thing that I know women who actually feel guilty about if they desire to get married, because if they really cared about the
Wow.
gospel, they
Huh.
would they would be single. Like I was at a CrossCon 2-3 years ago, and the Brooks Bruiser, I think this is his name, with Radius International. I
Yeah.
think that's the right organization. He said that, like, basically he told the women in there, which is really helpful. If you want to be a missionary, but you also want to be married and you're not married yet, do not go on the mission field until you're married. Because he says, I've counseled countless women who've gone to the mission field as single, and then they leave when they're in their early 30s because they have that good, godly, proper longing to be a wife and a mother.
Mm.
And afterwards, these girls were talking. It's like, oh, I really want to be a missionary because they really care about lost people. They came to Christ in college, and they want to bring people to Christ.
Hmm.
And their thing was like, I really want to be a missionary, but I kind of want to be a mom. I want to be a wife. Like, what should I do? Should I not be a missionary? And I think there's been a failure in evangelicalism about how to counsel people through there. And that's one reason why we can talk about
Yeah.
the culture, how the culture is getting married late, but it's happening in the church too. There's
Yeah.
too many, early 30s people who are single who desire to get married. And I think that Doug Wilson is actually helpful here. He says that singleness is actually, for someone who wants to get married, is a burden, because they do have that good and godly desire. I think that's a helpful framework. Now,
Yeah.
again, it's something that we should be content in all seasons of life, because God has his place in this season for a reason, because he is sovereign.
Yeah.
But be able to put in a framework of being, hey, like, your desire for a spouse, your desire to be a mother is a good and godly thing. And we should try to, as you say, cultivate that. And how, and young women should cultivate that in their early 20s, in their middle, in their high school years, because they're most likely going to be a wife and a mother one day. And something with the young men is they're going to be a husband and a father one day. They need to cultivate that even before they're
Yeah.
they reach that age. Um, and then moving forward, when it comes to the community aspect, when it comes to the local church, I think one thing that we need to move forward to in the future is this goes back to, I think it's Mark Dever wrote a book called The Compelling Community,
Mm.
and it's the way that the community works in the local church that's a lot of ways, and actually we're supposed to be salt and light. Yes, individually, it's true that we're going to be salt and light of the earth, but it's actually the church that's going to be the salt and light of the earth. You as an individual, yes, you can be a portion of that salt and light, but
Right.
it's actually local church communities. So if the churches were stepping up in the public square when it comes to meeting the needs of those in their communities, being out there, people know that hey, the First Baptist Church down the road, they're going to be there for our community. I think that we need to work on that a lot, and it makes me. I mean, in the past few months, it's been really sad to see, but it's been really great to hear more of them. Is from Ben Sass. You know, with Ben Sass's unfortunate diagnosis of pancreatic cancer. But he's been on 60 Minutes. He's been on Hoover Institution. You know, several podcasts. I mean, it feels like every single one. And then he has his own podcast, which was really helpful as
Hmm.
well. And is that we really lost our sense of community in America and in the church. I again, the amount of, Christians who go to church, they are involved in things, but the way that they're actually community is not there, is not cultivating. Like, you need to be in a community to cultivate. There's no lone cultivators, you know?
Yeah,
But go ahead.
that's good. I think you're right, and I think some churches have turned against their community, and they
Mm,
almost have an pure oppositional stance to their community. I've seen that in the Reformed world, some of the harder edges, and I would caution against it. It's not that the church approves of everything the community does. Of course, it doesn't. But I think drag queen story hour and the normalization of homosexuality and a certain discourse online that actually encouraged, and some of this was among Christian nationalists, some of it was Doug Wilson and others, that encouraged people to say America's done. Basically, I saw a giving up
mm,
among a lot of reformed people, some of the unwoke folks out there. I think some of it was genuine conviction talking, and I think some of it was a market opportunity. And I think what it has led people to say is it's just over. America's just over. And you see that regularly now. When there's something bad that happens in American culture, there's a certain wave that will come out on social media where people will say, see, now America's over. We just had a Supreme Court decision about birthright citizenship. And I saw this kick up on social media in the last couple of weeks where people now they trot it back out. See, the Constitution is dead. What I would be a voice for here imperfectly is just to say who is deciding when America is over. What is the point at which we say, oh, that's it, abandon it? Is that what is that what God said to the exiles in Babylon, in Jeremiah? Were they supposed to just give up and just sort of not do anything? No, they're supposed to be in Babylon. They're supposed to continually actively seek the shalom of the city by being a redemptive presence in Babylon. I think that's us too. I think we need to stop calling time on America, honestly. Not because I think America's in a wonderful place on every issue. I don't. But because I know of no mandate where Peter or Paul or Jesus said, hey, it's getting really rough out here in first century Rome. Just call time on this. Just find a retreat spot, find a nice beach house, and just sort of get away from this and stop engaging. The salt and light thing I said on Jesus' part, that's over. It's done. That's not a New Testament philosophy. So I would just say, let's stop calling time on America
mm,
and let's just stay at our post. Chuck Colson used to say that a lot to people around him. Stay at your posts. It was taken from his military days. Stay at your post. Do what you can do.
mm,
Cultivate your surroundings. And by the way, stop falling prey again to the lie that if you join up with this social media guy, if you go to this conference, if you buy his books, if you listen to their podcast, then they will enable you to join the marching forces of those who are going to make everything right within a year or two. Don't that very quickly ends up being something close to a false gospel.
mm,
On the singleness thing, just a quick response, not a kickback, just a response. I think we do need I think we need to help men and women, young men and women, find the script for marriage again, to the point you
mm,
just made. It's not a good thing, in other words, to just praise singleness and leave 20 somethings and 30 somethings out in the wilderness. And then they discover at age 37 they actually do want to be married and they have no pathway for it. That's not a positive development. So let's actually go back to Jeremiah 29:6 and let's help our sons take wives. Let's rebuild marriage culture in the local church, to the point you made a minute ago. Let's rebuild that in a healthy way, not a weird way where elders are watching over the shoulders of single men and women, but in a healthy, normal, relaxed, gospel freedom way. Let's rebuild marriage culture. But then let's also continue, nonetheless, to say there is singleness that is very doxological, God
Mhm.
centered, and useful to the kingdom. And so a single man or woman who is single minded for Jesus can do a ton of good work in all sorts of capacities. And we want to hold that out as well. They're not letting down the team because they're not married. They have a
Mhm.
vital 1 Corinthians 7 role to play. Think of if you took away Paul. Let's just do
Mhm.
one quick thing here, thought experiment. I take away Paul, in human terms, that is, from the early
Mhm.
church. We just lost a lot. We
Mhm.
lost a dynamo. We lost a man who plants numerous churches and goes on 4 missionary journeys and disciples a ton of Christians and writes 13 books of the New Testament. So let's just remember how valuable single manhood and womanhood can be for the kingdom.
No, that is so true. That we need to. I mean, I was talking to one of my best friends. He since it's a call to singleness, he doesn't really desire like a wife or kid children. He likes kids, but he just doesn't like. It's not a desire for him.
Sure.
And one of his considerations is to be a missionary in Japan because the one benefit that he has that although I'm not currently married, that is a desire of mine. Like I know that I have a godly desire for a spouse and children is that it'd be harder for me to, if I had a family, to move to Japan. He doesn't have to worry about that. Um, and now with the benefits, he still can communicate with his family so much. Where there's so many benefits now with the current technology, and so a lot of my friends who are like have a true calling for singleness, that they very much think about that. Two more things. One, back to another comment when it comes to those who hey, America has fallen, the Constitution's dead, there's no hope for America. I have two responses for that, and they're very much connected. First is the American idea is very strong. Um, our belief in self government is yeah. Our structure of government is the most perfect structure of government in a fallen world can have. Because again, I mean, we read the Old Testament when it comes to monarchies. Because I know some conservatives, or at least those who are on the right wing of side of things, that they want a monarchy because
Right.
they don't trust people to make the right decision. And I'm like, our American idea, like we've had times like this that have been horrible. And again, not the same way. We weren't having cultural hysteria, in the 1860s, but America was very divided in the 1860s, right? I mean, we still survived, and so we definitely have, I think, still bright years ahead, if the Lord wills. But then also, I believe in God's sovereignty, and like Christians do not have to live in anxiety of the current cultural moment. Whatever does happen, if America doesn't survive 25 years from now, which I think it still will, or whatever, the Lord's sovereign, and He's gonna be with us. And then the last thing is one more question for you. Is there any main takeaways that you want people to have from your book on a call to cultivate?
Yeah, I love your comment there. Good words. I think I want people to understand how redemptive and powerful God is. I close a call to cultivate with the story of kintsugi pottery that Makoto Fujimura has talked a lot about, where a piece of pottery, a bowl, let's say, is shattered, and then through an elaborate process, Japanese artists through kintsugi art restore it, and this pot is remade, and it has these gold filaments all through it. And Fujimura's point is it's more beautiful and much more valuable than before. It genuinely is in market terms. And I think that's a lovely picture of the gospel and what it does for us. It's even a picture of what I think God was doing with his wayward people in the old covenant. His people abandon his promises and his good purposes, and he ends up bringing judgment upon them, and he resituates them in Babylon. But his resituation is the means by which the gospel starts to, or the good news, the redemptive purposes of God, I should say, starts to trickle out to the nations. And then there's this massive shift from Israel being effectively against nations to the people of God, the new Israel, being in the nations and taking the gospel to them. And so, what we can take hope in is that God is redeeming all things in a big sense,
Mm,
ultimately through Christ. And then at the lay level, at the lower level, the day-to-day level, God is just in the business of redeeming. And whatever is hard for us, whatever is inducing lots of anxiety in us, which is happening for a ton of us, God will redeem, God will work, God will renew,
mm,
God will change. We don't want to be driven, in some, by a fear-based paradigm. We don't need to fall prey to ideology, even on the right, that tells us that globalists and corporations have corrupted America, and the only way to move forward is to basically do away with the system as it has been and embrace monarchy, or at least much bigger government. I mean, you're hearing this on the right now. Even in politics, we can see that God is working. God is moving. There's tremendous good still working through America, and but this isn't on our shoulders. My last comment is that I want people to read A Call to Cultivate, God willing, and come away very much feeling this, that they should get active. They should plant a garden, whether a physical one or a spiritual one, so to speak, in all phases of life. But they should not feel that it's on their shoulders.
mm,
I say that on social media, Harrison, and people push back, sometimes push back hard. Oh, so you're selling defeatism. Oh, so you're saying we're passive. Oh, we don't do anything. And I say, what? No, no. The church isn't in a healthy place in this area. The church is alternately anxious and then falling prey to the controlling trap, thinking
mm,
the opposite of anxiety is us making it right. It's not. It's not on our shoulders to save our kids. It's not on our shoulders to get married. It's not on our shoulders to have a strong marriage. It's not on our shoulders to build a church, a local church. It's not on our shoulders to figure out vocation. It's not on our shoulders, certainly, to save America, whatever that means. And 50 other things are equally true. It's on God's shoulders. And Jesus has strong shoulders. And he
mm,
is not going to fail in anything he has promised to do. The Father is is working through his Son and his Spirit, and we can have absolute confidence that the purposes of God will not fail. That is not soft passivism talking. That is just simple faith in Christ, and I
mm,
think we need to go back to basics in that area.
mm. Oh, the glories and excellencies of Christ. How beautiful are they? Well, Dr. Strand, thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and to talk about your most recent book. For those listening, I would really highly encourage reading it. Very helpful book, very readable too. Which this is a book that you can give to a high school student, someone in your youth group, your son or daughter, who can read it, understand it, and really learn a lot from it. So, thank you so much, Dr. Strand.
Thank you, Harrison. Really enjoyed the conversation.
Yep. God bless.
God bless.